Greetings, COMTO family. This is April Rye, President and CEO of the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials. And I first just want to thank you so much for joining us for this important and meaningful discussion, which, it's not a coincidence, is taking place in October during National Disability Employment Awareness Month. As many of you know, this month elevates and celebrates the contributions of persons with disabilities to our workplace and our economy. And the theme for this year's National Disability Employment Awareness Month is advancing access and equity. This is quintessentially COMTO. And I could not be more grateful for the hardest working advisory council in the business, COMTO's Accessibility Advisory Council, for putting this together. I want to send a huge shout of appreciation to Ms. Lena Aragon, Operations Manager, Palm Tran Public Transportation, Martin Carithi, Director, System-Wide Accessibility, Capital Metro, and you may know him as Mr. President, Christian T. Kent, Board Advisor for COMTO's Board of Directors and Principal of Transit Management Consulting, LLC. Truly appreciate this council's leadership in ensuring that the transportation needs of all those we serve are integrated into COMTO's programs and advocacy initiatives. Now, let me tell you, today we are in for a treat. I want to thank our esteemed panelists, Carmen Sita Mitchell, Dr. Lex Frieden, and Athalie Malone for their involvement in today's panel. We are so grateful that you can join us and share your personal experiences and all the valuable contributions that you continue to make in the transportation industry as professionals. The word minority in Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, it includes all underrepresented groups in transportation leadership and our workforce, including persons with disabilities. And it is through webinars like this that we keep critically important topics at the forefront and showcase just how smart it is to be more open to the diversity of experiences and perspectives that leaders like you bring to the decision-making table in transportation. Our hope is that our organizational and agency members that are joining us for the call today are going to better understand what is possible and what can be gained by further embracing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility into their workforce. We hope that those of you who are listening in are going to be inspired by the experiences you hear and motivated to pull up a seat at the table to persons with disabilities to fill the workforce pipeline in transportation. Truly looking forward to the discussion, and thank you all again. It's my pleasure to turn this over to Mr. Christian T. Kent.
Well, thank you, President Rye. I appreciate that wonderful introduction. We are delighted to have our distinguished panel of leaders today from the disability community talk about their experiences in the industry and how they've been able to bring their individual experiences to the table in helping with organizational decision making. And, you know, I was talking with the panelists briefly before we started, recalling my own experience working at a transit agency with a large board, and recognizing that when accessibility issues and disability issues came up, that it would have been so wonderful to have members of the board who could speak from firsthand experience on disability. We were fortunate to have some that had worked with the community, but that added element of authentic experience that comes from having a truly diverse group of leaders at the table really yields the best decision making of all. And so we wanted to give you as participants today the opportunity to hear directly from people who made that happen. And hopefully that we can create that scenario more and more throughout the industry to increase participation of a truly diverse group of leaders in our various transit organizations. So we have three panelists today, and I am going to introduce them one at a time. Actually, I think I'll do the bio first for Professor Carmen Sita Mitchell. She's originally from New York. She has made Palm Beach County her home for the last 20 years. She holds a baccalaureate in humanities from New York University and an MA in English from St. John's University and an MED in higher education and leadership from Lynn University. Carmen Sita, appointed by the Palm Beach Board of County Commissioners, serves as the chairwoman of the Palm Trans Service Board and sits on its two standing subcommittees where she holds public meetings on transit issues and service changes for both fixed route and paratransit service. In addition to her work and advocacy for those who are transportation disadvantaged and those with disabilities, Carmen Sita also serves on the board of the Florida College English Association, Boys Town, South Florida, and Lighthouse for the Blind of the Palm Beaches, where she volunteers. She's also a member of the President's Advisory Panel for the Hadley Institute for the Blind, where she offers advice on improvement to their educational programs for the blind and visually impaired. She is devoted to the cause of helping the blind and visually impaired community want the greatest quality of life. Welcome, Professor Mitchell, and affectionately known as Carmen Sita. And Martin, would you like me to do all three first?
Yeah, go ahead and introduce our other two panelists, and then we'll just launch right into the conversation.
Okay, excellent. All right, so we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the questions right after. Okay, well, the next is Miss Athalie D. Malone, who was born on December 28th, 1965 on the beautiful island of St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. She moved to San Antonio in 1980 and proudly graduated from SGRH Royal in 1983. Ms. Malone attended Bethune-Cookman University, where she studied business administration. Due to health, she did not finish her last year. She worked in the private sector and ecumenical sector of San Antonio from 1987 to 2007, at which time she lost her vision. She is past president and current member of the National Federation for the Blind. She's a past board member and secretary and current member of San Lighthouse Lions, co-chair of National White Cane Awareness Day, and she is chairperson of the Disability Access Advisory Committee. And then finally, we have Mr. Lex Frieden, who is professor of biomedical informatics and rehabilitation at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, UT Health, and he is adjunct professor of physical medicine and rehabilitation at Baylor College of Medicine. Mr. Frieden also directs the Independent Living Research Utilization Program at TIRR Memorial Hermann in Houston. ILRU is a research, training, and technical assistance program on independent living for people with disabilities and older adults. Mr. Frieden has served as chairperson of the National Council on Disability, president of Rehabilitation International, and chairperson of the American Association of People with Disabilities. He is recognized as one of the founders of the independent living movement by people with disabilities in the early 1970s and was instrumental in conceiving and drafting the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Mr. Frieden holds degrees in psychology from the University of Tulsa and the University of Houston and has been awarded an honorary doctorate in law by the National University of Ireland. He received 2 presidential citations for his work in the field of disability. Mr. Frieden is an author of more than 100 published contributions to literature in this genre. He has given more than 1,000 lectures and presentations at events through the US and internationally, and he is currently leading a national research study to evaluate the impact of the ADA and identify population group disparities related to employment, transportation, housing, and community living. So I feel sufficiently outclassed hearing those 3 bios. We definitely have an august panel here. So, Mr.
Absolutely.
Please start our wonderful conversation with these 3 luminaries.
Absolutely. Thank you to the 3 of you guys for joining us. My name is Martin Creasy. I am the Director of System-Wide Accessibility at CapMetro, and also, as been mentioned, co-chair of the COMTO Accessibility Advisory Council. So let's get to this conversation. All 3 of you, as we've heard, are distinguished and accomplished in the various areas from which you come to transit. But tell me a little bit about how you got to your position of influence with your respective boards. And Carmencita, will you get us going?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I'm delighted to be here in this esteemed company. So thank you for the invitation. Interestingly enough, I grew up in a transit household. My dad was, in fact, a bus operator. And so I would watch him as a child writing on index cards and colored pens all the routes in, and this is New York City's MAPSOA, one of the largest systems in the country, if not the world. And at the time, I didn't realize those were metrics. So I grew up with that. So in theory, this is not my first rodeo, pun intended. That being said, you know, as I moved to Florida and disability set in, when you are living in a large metropolis like New York City, you don't realize the extent to which one might need to rely on public transit because everyone there does. So when I came to Florida, I realized that there was a real need for more sustainable transportation. Florida, especially South Florida, is really not set up as a transit town, if you will. And so there were very many struggles. And this is prior to the time when we had services like Uber and Lyft and so forth. So 7 years ago, my disability reached a bit of a peak. And I started to come out at the urging of friends and colleagues who were doing things in the blind community. And so I came out to the meetings as a member of the public. And before long, my interest was piqued, and I was encouraged by one of our longest standing board members to join the board, and then eventually the succession to board chair, which I take rather seriously because all of our board members come from esteemed backgrounds, yet few of them rely on public transportation in the way that I do. And throughout my tenure as board member and chairwoman, you know, I've had to represent various constituencies. I hold the seat as the fixed route rider, but I also represent the senior community, those transportation disadvantaged, my students at Palm Beach State College who rely heavily on public transportation, and of course, those of us with disabilities. So I come to this supporting various constituencies, but the one thing I'll say that has kept me motivated and kept me involved in this work is our system. I'm real biased. PalmTran is a system that lives by its mission to provide access to opportunity for all in a manner that is safe, efficient, and courteous. If I didn't have PalmTran to rely on to get me to the college or to the organizations that I support and, you know, just everyday life, I wouldn't be able to have any leadership capacity in any place in the community. And so I love the fact that PalmTran lives by its mission by supporting employees with disabilities, those who are the constituent riders with disabilities, and last but not least, those of us who sit on the board. And so that's how I came into this, and all of these things are what are going to keep me there. So thank you.
Fantastic. Ms. Malone, we've talked a little bit about how you made it to your position of influence. Could you share a little bit about how you made it onto the VIA board?
Basically, I decided to, after seeing several discrepancies and whatnot, I decided to apply, because here we have to apply and go through the city council to be appointed. And it's due to persistence that I finally got on the board. I started in 2016 applying, and I finally joined the board in 2019. That's when I was appointed. Much like Carmencita, I have used transit for most of my life. My father was both not only bus but taxi. So I've seen how transit operates. And there was some discrepancies here within VIA that I decided that they could do a little better with. They had already started the VIA Trans, and they started their VIA Trans when ADA started. So, you know, they were ahead of some of the other transits, but it needed to be updated. I sit on the board now as secretary. And that's due to the fact of, you know, just we vote whoever's on, And I think I do a pretty good job as a secretary, letting people know certain things, not only about the disabled, but about the whole system itself. Because I do ride both fixed route and paratransit.
Fantastic. So I'm hearing persistence here, engagement on the other side. Dr. Frieden, you've had a distinguished career in the independent living movement. What drew your attention to transit and you know, your interest in joining a policy board at Houston Metro?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and it's a pleasure for me. The my interest in transit started after I broke my neck in a car accident in 1968, and I was very limited in terms of the ability to be mobile in the community. In about 1974, when a group of us were in school at the University of Houston, we were sitting around a table late Friday night talking about how it did not make much sense to us that we, having started our jobs, were paying taxes and did not have access to all of the things the taxes provided. For example, the sidewalks and the public transit. So we raised those issues publicly by demonstrations. My colleagues and I, one morning, met the bus at the city hall where the mayor was about to take a ride, and asked the mayor why we were also not able to ride on the bus. That led to a number of confrontations with the city council, with the city administration, and they eventually decided they would have a little project to experiment with paratransit. Later on in 1987, our group, the Coalition for Barrier-Free Living, actually sued the bus company and the city, and that suit was dropped when the bus company agreed to purchase 100% accessible buses going forward. Now, that was just a little bit before the ADA required every transit system to purchase accessible buses. I followed that for quite some time and determined that the way to make the system work properly for people with disabilities was to get involved in the process. And so a group of us met with a candidate for mayor in 1990 after the ADA had passed. And that candidate was a man named Sylvester Turner. He was African American. He was eager to assume some leadership position in the community. And we told him we would support him for mayor. We believed he understood our issues as people with disabilities and minorities. And in exchange for that, we wanted him to appoint someone with a disability to the transit board. He agreed to do that, but unfortunately, he was not elected. And we were frustrated in our efforts, but later on, another mayor appointed a person with a disability, and that made some real progress because our new trains, our rail system, was being developed at that time, and Mr. Silva made great contributions to ensuring their accessibility. But now, fast forward 6 years ago, Sylvester Turner was elected mayor of our city. He appointed me right after he was elected to the transit board, and I've had the opportunity to serve with other community members, and I think our transit system is probably second to none in the country as far as services to people with disabilities are concerned. We've recently been in the process of remodeling and rebuilding all of our transit stops, more than 9,000 stops around our system to be completely accessible and updated. And we've invested in a lot of other technologies that will enable people with disabilities to be more engaged and full participants in our community.
So I love that. I'm hearing you went right to the core of government, reaching out with the mayor and going through the system to make that change. Um, Carmen Cita, you're chairwoman, and can you tell us a little bit about, as chairwoman, how your disability impacts your organization and its approach to accessibility? Because um, you bring your whole person, and that is who you are. How does your leadership impact your agency's approach to
Absolutely.
accessibility?
I think as well, first and foremost, this is COMTO. So as a woman of color with a severe disability, people are on the board, in our county commission, and, in the citizenry, they're able to see the functionality of all those parts coming together, right? Everyone's talking about the buzzwords of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all these wonderful things. But if you don't really have the vocabulary for understanding who these people are, who we are, then, a lot of the legislation is just paperwork, right? And so when my board assembles, we are all together making decisions. We'll be making some important decisions this week at our board meeting, but they understand that, every organization has its leadership. And so when we disperse from our meetings, they're all getting into their cars, right? We have at least 3 board members that are what I like to call functionally disabled, one of which is in a wheelchair. So we need to remind our county commissioners and the citizenry that we are people just like everyone else. And so having our membership visible to the board, visible to our executive leadership team and everyone who attends from the public is a reminder of why the service needs to exist, why it has to continue to allow access to all members of our community. There are many people in the world who think that they need to see every disability to understand it. And then there are those who don't see it, right? The unique thing about my disability is I can't always recognize others with disabilities because of my vision. But ultimately, that's eyesight. My vision is a sustainable source of transportation for all constituencies in society. As the world continues to evolve and prices go up, as you see the situation in the Middle East, more and more people may find themselves transportation disadvantaged. So ultimately, we need people who are the movers and shakers in the community, who are already utilizing the service to be able to make important decisions to ensure that the service remains sustainable for everyone. And I think that my board appreciates my leadership in the sense that I'm bringing all of that to the table, but also with an eye toward, again, sustainability for everyone in the community.
Appreciate that. So I'm hearing disability is not the other, it's part and parcel of human diversity, but you're modeling leadership as well as demonstrating the need. Miss Malone, we've talked in the past and getting to know one another about the when you first joined and when you first went to a meeting. Can you tell us to your first board meeting? Can you tell us how your presence on the VIA board impacts VIA's approach to accessibility?
Basically, the first board meeting, well, it was a work session. Uh, it was like, okay, we didn't know she was blind, but they immediately started working with me to figure out how to accommodate me, which meant they had to accommodate other disabilities. But more than that, they took me, I wouldn't say take me in, but they started questioning, how can we change this? How can we do this? There was always, they have always had a accessible transit advisory committee that would advise them. But until I stepped on, it was like, okay, this is what they're talking about. They're seeing it in real time and using it. And because of this, now with what we're doing now, we're actually in design process for an advanced rapid transit. They have asked me. I have worked with the development personnel, Ms. Cami Horn, about what should we do to make sure it's more accessible? So I've been in on that part of the design to make sure that it is already done from the beginning for the advanced rapid transit. Other things have been done. Paratransit has gone up now since I've been on with everything that they have seen that we have discussed, and now it is at an 85% positive rating. There are over 4,000 trips per week and 1.1 million trips this year alone on the paratransit. We have grown the paratransit. And now we also have a new technology that allows people to travel that are visually impaired without on the fixed route called NaviLens. It is a new app that you can use. All of this has come about within the last 4 years. And hopefully there will be a lot more as time goes on and we see things and we learn things together. It is about not just deciding what's best for them, but asking someone what will help you get around on transit better because you are disabled.
So if I'm not correct, you when you arrived to that first work session, they were not aware that
They
you
were
were an
not aware.
individual with a disability and that you were blind or low
Yeah.
vision.
Yeah.
Okay, and obviously you've certainly made your mark there, and began to influence all these different pieces. Interestingly enough, Miss Cammie Horn was the first recruit I ever had as chapter president in COMTO Austin. So bringing all that full circle within the COMTO family. Dr. Frieden, would you like to touch upon how your disability impacts the accessibility of the organization that you serve, and sort of tie on to that, what kind of recommendations you might have for individuals with disabilities who want to get into the transportation industry, whether that's professionally or at the policy making level.
Okay, I appreciate the opportunity to respond to those issues. One thing that I've always felt is that I'm representing not only other people who use wheelchairs like myself, but also other people with disabilities and people without disabilities who don't really have voices on the mainstream among the mainstream board members. We have the opportunity to meet a lot of people when we're using public transit, and many of those people are generally not represented among those who are appointed to the boards and to leadership positions. And I feel like it's my responsibility to represent those people as well. It's also become kind of an interest of mine. People who use two wheels rather than four, like I do, bicyclers. And I think it's important for us to accommodate people who want to use the transit system and they have other means of transit from the bus stop to their home, like bicycles or mothers with strollers and others who are needing to use the system. So the thing is, people need to get involved at any number of levels. And most transit agencies, as you've heard, do have advisory committees. And those advisory committees, people should apply to be on them and to show why they want to be represented. And the same thing is true, I think, of the board. When elections occur and we know who are making appointments to boards and commissions, not just the transit board, but people with disabilities need to be involved in all the city boards, the parks board, the health department board, the emergency management board, and so on. People with disabilities need to be in leadership positions so that we can share information that we have obtained through our lives and through our personal experience and our lived experience. And I think that's just one of the things that I've learned throughout the advocacy work that I have done. Another thing I'd like to mention is that the transit agency is a big company. It's not only about providing rides from one bus stop to the next or one paratransit stop to the next. It's about hiring thousands of people in our case. It's about spending billions of dollars. People with disabilities should be sought as employees. They should make up a portion of the workforce. Accommodations should be made for them so that they can be as productive as possible. The same thing is true of our contracting. I think it's very important that transit agencies spend money in the area where minorities are, that we ensure that we have good outreach programs that include people with disabilities. We just started a program in Houston to ensure that staff had the capability to outreach to organizations of people with disabilities who were running businesses, and to help them be prepared to compete for contracts. The wide range of activities that a transit agency influences should not be kind of forgotten in the face of the obvious service that we provide. So I think it's materially interest for people to get engaged at any number of levels to make our systems better, serve ourselves better, and to serve the public better.
Yeah, you took note of a few efforts at your agency that I think are something worth reiterating, and that's sort of workforce recruiting type efforts to bring people with disabilities into the industry, into the organization, so that they can just reflect the incredible diversity of our agencies and our industries, as well as being intentional about bringing in and opening opportunities to businesses that are headed by individuals with disabilities, but being intentional about engagement and opportunity. We are probably at about the point in which we are looking to source some questions from the chat from our audience. Is that about time, Lena? Or shall I?
You can continue, Martin.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'm going to toss the popcorn to Carmencita. Can you talk a little bit about how if you have any thoughts about what Dr. Frieden was mentioning there about workforce and intentionality and recruiting and engagement. How do you see us finding opportunities to open the doors for people to be part of the industry in the ranks of the organization, as well as
Absolutely. In fact, Martin, you must have read my mind, because as Ms. Malone and Dr. Frieden were speaking, I was thinking of the similarities in my thought process, because our governments, in particular in Palm Beach County, are working heavily on the issues of workforce education and workforce housing. Whenever I go out to speak to the commissioners on behalf of PalmTran, I have to remind them that for us to have effective workforce housing and workforce education, and to build further west in regions that are not developed, we have to have workforce transportation, right? At the public colleges, the one of which I teach, most of our public colleges in Florida are involved in and engaged with pathways for our students, which concern the majors of study that they're taking and the direction and trajectory that their life is going to take based on that major. Well, if our student body doesn't have adequate transportation, then they're not going to be able to accomplish those goals, right? My students are writing in papers all the time of the anxiety of not having sustainable transportation to get to and from the college. And so these are important issues, literally and figuratively, right? For us to have a pathway, we need a means by which to get there. Well, that's what transportation offers. It offers people an opportunity to get from where they are to where they want to go. And so it has to work in tandem with our workforce education and our workforce housing, so that people can live and work and play in a way that's conducive to them, and not be left out literally without a way to get to their first or last mile, right? So I highly recommend that the transit agencies remain informed with those with disabilities, with all constituencies. And in order for us to do that, we also have to not have trepidation of getting involved, right? Very often, the way in which we diversify organizations and integrate them is to just show up, right? We, as people with disabilities, have to show up, if nothing else, for ourselves, right? And then, of course, the greater part of society gains that respect and realizes how valuable our contributions are. Because again, and I will reiterate, as more and more people become transit dependent, they're also going to depend on us to figure out how to effectively use it, right? Most of us, this has been our life. And so we know when it's effective and when it isn't. And we really are going to become the leaders in not just the constituencies that we support in government, but also leaders in the community of how to effectively use transportation with or without the necessary accommodations on board for wheelchairs, vision impaired, etc. We are the people who, that's what I always say, we are the people, period. Enough said.
Yeah. I see something in the chat here, and I'm going to go to it. And I'll take this to Ms. Malone. Can you talk a little bit about any of the accommodations or anything? Like you said, you showed up. They weren't informed that you were blind, so I imagine you took them off guard a little bit. But what did they do to make sure that you have everything that you need to be able to advise and provide the right kind of leadership that you'd like to provide the organization? What did they do to work with you?
Miss Malone, please unmute.
Okay, sorry about that. The when I started, they were aware of Braille, so some of the stuff was in Braille. By the next meeting, they had stuff in Braille for me, but I more used the computer, and they made it possible for me to have an accessible computer, a computer that speaks to me. I can, speak to it and whatnot. I type already, so I type by touch, so that's no problem. And most things are done through the computer for me. If there is a need for me to do, as secretary, if the chair or the vice chair is missing and I have to run the board meeting, they do a large print for me. It's very limited vision, but if it's a very large print, I can do I can use it so that the computer doesn't talk back while I'm talking. Mm-hmm. They make sure everything is known for me. They set up things so that I can view it at another level. Sometimes with maps and things, there's no way. I have to they they show it, and then they describe it for me, because some of the maps cannot be brailled.
So they've been accommodating.
Yes, they do it very well. And like I said, they have an accessible transit advisory committee, and on that committee there is blind, deaf, cognitive, and seniors, and they advise. And basically what that does, that gives them an advisory. They show from that and whatever, but with me on there now on the board, they realize, okay, this is what they're talking about. This is what we need to do. This is how we need to do it.
Got it. So you're able to bring some of what's being discussed in that space, bring it forward and carry it forward within the broader VIA board.
Yes.
Martin, this is Lena.
Yes, I was just about to say, let me let my colleague Lena Aragon, the other co-chair, hop in here and source us some questions from the chat.
Yes, hello everyone. So we have some very interesting questions here on the chat room and on the Q&A. So we're going to go one by one as time permits through those questions. And if it's intended from one of the panelists, I'll let you know who it is for. Or if it's for the three of you, I will also ask you if you could please provide your answers. So we have, and Dr. Frieden, you talked about recruiting people with disabilities. So we have a question here as, how can we better recruit persons with disabilities to positions within transportation?
So I think transit agencies generally have a pretty good system of recruiting. They have to keep the operators working and to keep the mechanics working and to keep everything moving on the streets. They do so by going to meetings in the public and by presenting the opportunities at conventions and by publicizing using the newspaper and other media. We need to focus on people with disabilities and show them what opportunities there are that can be done by people with disabilities, and do so by using people with disabilities as examples. One thing that our transit agency has done when we do our public announcements and television advertising and so on is we use people with disabilities as players in the show, so to speak. When we are showing graphics, we always include people with disabilities, and then make special outreach, I think, to organizations of people with disabilities, to disabled student service programs. At every university now has a disabled student services program. It's a great place to go and recruit, meet people with disabilities, encourage them to consider roles in transit. So I think we apply the same principles we do to recruiting anybody, but we have to understand there are opportunities to reach directly to people with disabilities through organizations of people with disabilities, independent living centers, and others. These are ways that we can do outreach, specifically trying to recruit people with disabilities. And by the way, I think we ought to be asking questions of the transit agencies like we do with other minorities. What portion of the workforce have you employed that are people with disabilities?
Well, thank you very much for that. So, a subsequent question, and please, we would like to hear from the three panelists as this information would be very much appreciated. So, how can we make people with disabilities part of the DBE, disadvantaged business enterprise equation? How can we include that category as part of it?
This is Lex again. We just did it. So we took board action to create an office on business for people with organizations of people with disabilities and for organizations or companies run by veterans with disabilities. And we have done a lot of veteran outreach and outreach to companies that are run by people with disabilities. We have a staff that's responsible for that. We help train a lot of organizations, companies that are new companies run by veterans or people with disabilities, don't have a lot of experience contracting with large agencies. So we provide them with training, information, help them learn what they have to do in order to be competitive. And we also encourage them to partner with larger companies that are bidding on larger projects where they might be subcontractors. And I think these are all opportunities we need to reach for. But again, we did this primarily through board action. Our board just agreed to make that a priority.
Ms. Mitchell, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
I think that along with what Dr. Frieden is saying is, building coalitions with agencies that support those with a disability, whether it's vocational rehabilitation, Division of Blind Services, Centers for Independent Living, but also, your Secretary of State for the particular state, right, who would have records of businesses owned by minorities or people with disabilities, universities, colleges. I think tapping into the statistics and research of all of the citizenry really in the community will enable the transit organizations to develop a database of people with disabilities and match the talents or businesses, if you will, with contracts within the organizations and so forth.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Ms. Malone, do you have something you would like to add also?
As of right now, VIA is doing, I forgot what they call it, but we are going through all of the small businesses, not only the SBEs, but the DBEs also. Um, and we do use veteran owned DBEs and SBEs. Now, I would have to see if any of them, and I'm quite sure some of those are disabled. I don't think they have ever pulled it out by that, but we do have minority and veteran. And I'm quite sure we do have disabled in there because of the veterans, but we've never pulled it out like that. Now, I think within the comparison that we're doing, that will probably come up. But I'm quite sure it's not something that they're not adverse to, but it will be more looked upon as time goes on to make it equal to everybody.
Lena, I just want to comment from something that's in the chat that Mr. Ron Brooks says that one of the challenges is that the federal government does not recognize disability as a DBE category. I'm going to make a plug. COMTO does have a legislative council, and this sounds like something that might need advocacy at that level. So, it invites a conversation about how we could do that to make that kind of change. But back to you on questions and timekeeping, since you're our resident.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for that plug. And I think it's very well taken. It's something that we definitely want to look forward to it. And that conversation needs to happen. Absolutely. So, Ms. Malone, while you were giving your answers, you said a very key word, persistence. We all know that is challenging. So the question is, what kept you going? What made you persist?
That is something I have always been, even before I lost my vision. Perfect example, emergency management here in San Antonio. They were doing all kind of videos for, what do you do during an emergency? What do you do for this and whatnot? And I asked the question, well, what about the disabled? Well, they have family members. I said, who tell you they have family members? They're independent. We live independently. We have to do things on our own. And I kept persisting and persisted to the point that they changed up their videos and they basically challenged me. Well, if that's the case, then you come and be in the videos. And I said, fine, I'll do it. And I did the videos. You have to be persistent in anything you do in life, wherever you are in life, being disabled or not disabled. You have to be persistent. If it is something that you want, if it is something that you think is of value, you have to be persistent. You cannot let anybody stop you from being what you want or what you want to be or what you want to do.
Thank you very much. So we have a question here also for the three panelists, and I'm going to read it. How did you balance advocacy and needing to make changes to accessibility with informing people who may not have had the background or understanding of the issue?
This is Lex. I guess it's all about education, right? Ever since people were different, they had to explain to others how they're different and how they can be accommodated, and they also have to demonstrate what their abilities are. So I think your question is a good, but I do think that it's incumbent upon us not to assume that people understand what our limits are and what our abilities are. I think it's incumbent upon us to help them understand that we are able to do things, particularly given appropriate accommodations that they might not believe we can do. That requires demonstration in some cases, but it also requires, I think, maybe a healthy conversation from time to time.
Thank you, Dr. Frieden. Ms. Malone, would you like to take a stab at that one?
That's kind of hard to put that into words. I guess it's like you live your life and you show them how you live your life. It's not, yes, you have to educate. There are small things that you have to educate on. But at the same time, if you live your life, everybody can see you living your life, and they will ask questions and you answer. Some things are very relatable. You can see them. I'm blind. Yes, I get around by a cane. Or, those that get around with a dog, that's how we travel. That's how we're able to walk around. That's how we're able to travel. It's known that there's Braille. Some people don't realize the computers can help us also too. So that's something you may have to teach them. But I think if they are really willing to learn and they watch you, they can learn. One of the things I have learned since starting this journey is not so much they're wondering how you do what you do, is that they ask you, why do you do it? And to me, they're asking me, why don't you just give up? And that's not a factor. That's not a factor.
Thank you, Ms. Malone. Ms. Mitchell?
Well, this question has gotten me very emotional. And some of the things Ms. Malone has described are exactly my experience. I live a rather robust life in terms of not just my work and volunteer activities, but also my social life. And it amazes me when people who are, fully sighted and without any form of disability, or at least one that they'll admit to, how they will observe my goings and those of my friends. Almost looking down upon us in the way you would a pet or a child. And they wonder, as you said, how and why you do the things you do and don't give up. From my young years in dance training, one of the things the ballet master always said was that, one, you're only as good as the worst dancer. And two, the job of every ballerina is to make it look very easy. And so I think I've been able to accomplish that in my own life. The disability is likely not to go anywhere, but even if it were, by some miracle, my advocacy will remain, simply because there are people in disparate places in life with multiple disabilities. They could have vision impairment, hearing impairment, cerebral palsy, and so forth, right? All together. And so what we have to do is get the rest of the world to understand that we're just like everybody else. We're like regular people. And some of the things that people do in their own ignorance are the same ways in which they have looked down upon people from various cultures with different accents, last names, complexions, etc. All the things that would precipitate an organization like COMTO itself. And so, again, I would like to reiterate that by our leadership, by our example, and just living our lives to the best that we can, is the best way to educate people, because they will soon come to realize that they themselves may in fact be with disability, even if it is not ADA acknowledged. Their very disability could just be looking down upon those with. So I favor leadership as a way of helping people to overcome their maladies, if you will.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. And we have Christian with his hand up. So we have a few more minutes. Christian, I'm going to give you a very brief moment so we can go into our last question and then to our closing remarks.
Thanks, Lena. I just wanted to say to the panel that, when we've discussed the lack of diversity in leadership, or even, just in the ranks of our workforce, a lot of times employers have said, we couldn't find enough people who are interested. And, I remember that refrain about not being able to find racial diversity when they were trying to find a CEO for a transit agency. And we've seen how the CEO positions become much more diverse now as a result of just many years of really pressing the issue. On boards, it's still a problem that there are very few boards that have that kind of representation. So I wanted to ask you, since you pushed through and got into these roles, have you been able to persuade your organizations to become more allies more as allies to people in the disability community so that people with disabilities would feel welcome to approach. Because, you know, short of an organization like Transit Board Members with Disabilities of America, right? I mean, if you had to create something like that, right, so that you could build your numbers, how can all of us become more welcoming and help do our part to bring more people with disabilities into the leadership? And is it that feeling of not being welcome that's keeping people out?
I'd like to answer that one. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Malone.
Okay. Well, I will be very honest with you. I was one of the first disabled to be appointed to a government board. Now, since then, because I'm a bit of a very loud mouth, the city is pushing to get more disabled candidates to go for appointments on the different boards, not only transit, but for all the other boards within the city. And they're asking and they're begging them to come out.
Mm.
I think a lot of it is not only it takes one to break the barrier, but also that one has to be, again, persistent, and that one has to be a little bit more vocal to let others know, hey, we need you. You need to come on. Let's go. This is only how we're going to get our voices heard.
Mm. So each one teach one.
Yes.
Each one reach one.
Ms. Mitchell, would you like to take an answer to that one as well? And then
I
in the
would.
interest of time, we will do some closing remarks after that.
So as I said at the beginning, my organization, PalmTran, is near and dear to my heart. And under the leadership of Clinton B. Forbes over these years, it has really shifted and become a service that we can all be proud of. As part of my duties as chair of the board, I've taken an active role in our strategic planning, as well as some of the other organizations, nonprofits that I'm involved with. And for me, in order to make this happen, to get more people with disabilities in leadership positions and to get them involved, has to involve community engagement. I'm so proud of PalmTran in that they have invested themselves throughout our community, in particularly with those of us with vision impairment. And it's at every level, right? Parts of our executive leadership regularly attend meetings of our Braille Club in the community, the Lighthouse for the Blind, Florida Outreach Center. We had one of the providers, one of their former managers was an active member of the National Federation of the Blind, and he was completely sighted. And so as part of the strategic plan, PalmTran has invested literally, figuratively, and financially in these organizations, has made contributions financially to the Lighthouse for the Blind. And so PalmTran is visible as a transit organization involved in and engaged with the partner organizations that serve those with disabilities. We have, in fact, a promotion going on now where one of my other boards, Boys Town, South Florida, who serves children with mental illness and their families, PalmTran has been able to partner with them to create a bus wrap, to provide awareness in the community for that segment of our population in order to garner financial support from the larger constituency. And so community engagement is really important. If the organization, the transit organization, comes out into the community and lets people know that they're there for them, with them, and ready to employ them, people will come out of their place of trepidation and engage in perhaps leadership capacities or employment with those organizations. So I think it has to work hand in hand, but I'm really proud of PalmTran in their efforts to do that community work.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. So before we go to morning closing remarks, I want to leave you all with something that Ron Brooks shared with all of us here, which is key to what we are talking, what this discussion is about. And Ron says, we can move what we're not measuring. We need to track disability hiding, promotion, retention, and all of the aspects that we have discussed. We need the data in order to make our case. And with that, I turn it back to you, Martin, for our closing remarks.
Absolutely. Um, This has exceeded my expectations. I truly appreciate you guys bringing your perspectives, not just as individuals with disabilities, but leaders, community members, experts in your respective fields. I can't thank you enough for highlighting this conversation. I think what was mentioned early in the proceedings, that this is a conversation we've wanted to have within the COMTO Accessibility Advisory Council for a long time, and I just thank you guys for being a part of this. And I want to invite. I've put my email in the chat. I would encourage my co-chairs Lena as well as Christian to drop their emails in the chat. If you guys would like to join our very spirited accessibility advisory council, we meet quarterly or as needed, but we would love to have each and every one of your voices at the table to help continue these conversations, as well as the many other conversations that we have in that space. So I won't keep anybody else any longer. I can't remember if we were going to have National do anything to close this out. But from the advisory council perspective, we're greatly appreciative.
I think we're all good to say goodbye, Martin. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody that was present today, not only as panelists and to, of course, our COMTO National Office, but everybody that attend. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone, and see you the next time.
Thank you all.